Welcome to tonight's live stream. I'm going to get started in a minute. I just need to let everybody on social media know that the show is going on. Okay. Okay. Glad to see you here, Computer Robots. Glad to see you here, Verse. And glad to see you here, D Wood 78, C Wood, C Truth Revelator. Glad to see you here. Verse, if you need some help, if you're a man in crisis, you can pick up my book, The Man Crisis, on Amazon.com, and that book should be able to help you be able to work through whatever issues you're having. Um, so many men across the country have gotten help with the man crisis. So, need some help? You can go pick up the man crisis on Amazon.com. I'm glad you enjoyed the man crisis, Devin. I'm really glad that you learned something from it. It's a book that transforms lives and it really changes people's life. Glad to see you here, Gabria. Well, I'm gonna get into tonight's show. And before I get into tonight's show, I'm going to do a little perfunctory, and that perfunctory is talking about the 2021 books of the SJS Direct Imprint. And I've published 4 books this year for 2021, and those are John Haynes Taking Care of Business, which is available on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. ISIS Revenge of the Cyber Goddess, which is available in paperback and Kindle format. And you can also get the fall 2021 books, Stop Simping in Cyberspace and East Team Cancel Vacation, which are both available on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. So all 4 of these books are available right now on Amazon, and they make great gifts for all 3 of the books make great gifts for your kids, and maybe your teenager or your young son. They can go out here and be able to get these books and help themselves out. So you can get all these books on Amazon.com. So it's like, so we're going to get after well, that's one part of the perfunctory. The other one is another progress report on the upcoming John Haynes comic, John Haynes at Death's Door. And Antonio Balduri is now working on the climax scene in John Haynes at Death's Door, the big epic battle between John Haynes and the Greek god of death, Thanatos. And these pages are just incredible, and I can't wait to share them with you. So I'm going to be launching the John Haynes at Death's Door Kickstarter as soon as Antonio finishes the interior pages and the cover. And once I get the cover, then I will be doing the countdown to the Kickstarter launch. And I'm hoping everybody signs up for that Kickstarter and puts in a pledge for that upcoming Kickstarter. This will be my first full-length comic book, and it'll be a showcase of my skills as a writer in writing comics and working with an artist. Now, this is the second time I've worked with an artist, and I can't wait to, again, share this comic with you. And I can't wait to get this comic out here to all of the readers out here. Now, with all of that perfunctory complete, I'm going to get into tonight's topic. Now, tonight's topic is something that was inspired by a Facebook post that I presented online a couple of weeks ago, and that is talking about the baby boomers in Hollywood's fear of their own mortality. Now, the reason why we keep seeing so many reboots, remakes, and rehashes of old material from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even part of the early 90s is because your baby boomers control the entertainment industry. And because your baby boomers control the entertainment industry and control pop culture, these baby boomers do not want to pass the torch to the next generation of creators. Now, your baby boomers, what they want to do is play it safe, and they want to go with tested, tried and true, and guaranteed material. Now, this runs counter to everything the entertainment industry has always been about, because your entertainment industry has always been about risk, and your risk is why your entertainment industry has grown to be able to reap those huge profits over the course of the last 30 to 40 years. Because the time of the late 1960s was the time that the entertainment industry played it safe. And it played it safe because that time, the greatest generation, they were afraid of passing the torch. Now, in the late 1960s, early 1970s, Hollywood was in dire straits, and with your Hollywood struggling, they were not able to make money like they used to. Many of the films they were making were bombing at the box office, and the main reason why many of their films were bombing was due to a generational shift that was going on. Now, your silent generation and your greatest generation, they grew up in a different time, and they grew up with a different kind of entertainment. But as the people of the greatest generation and the silent generation were getting older, what was happening was we had the baby boomers coming in, and they were looking for a different kind of entertainment than their fathers and their grandfathers used to watch. Unfortunately, your Hollywood was filled with a lot of disconnected executives who were still stuck in the 1930s to the 1950s. And because they were stuck in the 1930s to the 1950s, all they were doing was going out here and producing these epic war movies from World War II. They were producing these musicals, and they were producing these big, grand, epic films featuring historical characters or based on big, long literary novels. And this type of content was really great during the days of the Depression all the way up and World War II and the 1950s, when audiences were interested in watching these kinds of films and spending an entire day at the theater. So you have your executives who were still out here producing content, but the content they were producing was appealing to a generation that was getting older. And as they were producing this content for this generation that was getting older, they were passing by the younger generation who were living in a completely different world, because the world of the late 1960s and 1970s was a very different place than the one from the Depression to World War II and the 50s. So those kids, they were growing up with a different kind of culture, and that culture was not being reflected on screen in your movies and in your TV shows. And as a result of this media not being reflected in their movies and their television, you didn't see a lot of kids going out to the movies. And they didn't go to the movies because a kid doesn't want to go, teenager doesn't want to go see a movie about World War II or a epic movie about some classic novel or see a movie that is about some big event that takes 3 or 4 hours. No, these kids were growing up in a world where they were seeing things going on like the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement, and the world had completely changed around them, and they were part of the changes that were going on in the world. But they were not seeing this reflected in their movies and television because old school Hollywood executives, they wanted to hold on to these old types of images and these old kinds of stories. And because they were trying to hold on to these old types of images in the hopes of being traditional, what happened was the audience wasn't coming to the movies on the regular. And as a result of this, Hollywood had to start making some changes because they started to see independent filmmakers starting to make inroads into the marketplace, like your Tom Laughlin with his classic movie from 1967 called Born Losers. This was a movie that was making a commentary on the aftermath of the Vietnam War, made a commentary on the ineffectiveness and disconnect between parents and children, and also featured a lot of bikers and a lot of different alternative cultures. So that was one of the first independent films to become what they called a blockbuster, because what we call the blockbuster today was created by Tom Laughlin and by the late Melvin Van Peebles. Both of those men were responsible for what we call the modern day blockbuster, because what they meant by blockbuster was people waited around the corner to go see this movie 3 and 4 times because this movie resonated with the viewer and it featured characters that they could relate to, because a lot of the kids who grew up in the late 60s, they saw their story in the Born Losers, and which started the Billy Jack saga. And then we had Melvin Van Peebles coming out with Sweetback, which showed that there was an audience for Black movies. Again, these were made outside of the Hollywood system, and these films were the thing that really started to make your entertainment industry start to wake up. Because in the aftermath of these kind of films being made with shoestring budgets, then Hollywood started making films like your Shafts and your Godfathers and what we consider to be classic cinema. And they also started to change many of their techniques for acting, because from the 1930s to the 1950s, we had a very formal style of acting. But as the mid 60s came along, the acting started to change because the type of performances that people wanted to see were more humanized and were more natural in approach. So we saw a revolution with Hollywood starting to change because these creators who were baby boomers started making their own content. And as they made their own content, it started to make these executives start to realize they needed to start going out here and hiring a lot of these new young directors and these new young filmmakers. And as we started to see more and more of these new young talents come along, what happened was we started to see a complete change in pop culture. That's how we got many of what we call the classic films that we all watch today, like your Star Wars, like your Rockies, like your Ghostbusters, like your Terminators. That was all due to Hollywood going out here and giving many of these baby boomers a chance with small budgets. And as they went out here with small budgets and made films, they made a lot of classic films that are part of our pop culture, because many of these films, they were again made very cheaply, and they were made with up and coming performers, and all of those performers then became all big stars, and that really revitalized the entertainment industry, and that allowed the entertainment industry to continue to grow, I'd say, until about the 2000s or so. Now, I say really the decline of that era was about maybe 1999 or 2000, because that's when we saw the first, what I call, attempt to try to reclaim the past with the Star Wars prequels. That was the first attempt to try to bring back the past, and that was all, as I see it, all part of what I see what is the fear many baby boomers have as related to their mortality. Now, when it comes down to a lot of your baby boomers these days, many of your baby boomers are nearing 60, 70, and some of them are even almost near 80 years old. And the reason why we keep seeing the same content from many of these baby boomers is because they fear passing away, and they fear that they will be forgotten. Yes, Gabriel, is definitely history repeating itself, because many of the boomers who took over the movie studios, many of the boomers who took over as television executives, many of these people, they are now up in age, and like their grandfather, like their fathers before them, they are stuck in set in their ways. They are stuck and set in the type of content they feel comfortable with. And what is happening now is many of these people, they are not interested in going out here and making the changes that they went out here and made a generation ago. So instead of them looking to go out here and try to accommodate the next generation and pass the torch, what they're doing is holding on to the levers of power. And what they're doing is trying to continue to maintain control. And the main reason why they want to maintain control is out of fear of themselves being forgotten. That is the main reason why many in the entertainment industry are continuing to make all of these reboots and these remakes and these relaunches, is they fear that their content will be forgotten. And those fears are exacerbated because they look at the world and how it has changed over the last 30 years, and how we have evolved from television and radio, which were the primary sources of entertainment electronically, and your books and magazines. And they're now seeing a completely different world where people are going out here and they're making their own content on YouTube, or they're doing like I'm doing and publishing their own books like I do on the SJS Direct Imprint, and selling them directly to customers. So many of these studio executives and many of these, even some of these actors, they are scared, and they're scared because they are dealing with a world where they're dealing with really intense competition. And for the first time, they're dealing with competition from a different world and a different approach to media. And that's what's got them terrified and fearing that they will become lost in the shuffle. Because in a world where you have a billion people who can go out here and have YouTube channels, they fear that their content will be lost in the shuffle. So what they want to do to stay relevant is they go out here and try to relaunch said concepts and try to relaunch said content in the hopes that people will remember that content. And they think that this is going to keep them alive. But what they don't understand is that classic media never really dies. No, classic media is going to stay there because the story resonates with people. Thank you, C Truth the Revelator, for the super chat. Now, he says this may be a little bit off topic, but look at what's happening to WWE. Vince McMahon has lost his touch with WWE fans, and AEW is going to take over. I'd say that really relates to what I'm talking about right now, because Vince McMahon is the same thing. He's a boomer who revolutionized wrestling in the 80s, and he's become disconnected and detached from his audience. He doesn't really want to go out here and give the audience what he wants. He wants to give the audience what he thinks that they would like, but what he wants to do is old and archaic, and the world of wrestling has changed. And that's why AEW is starting to gain ground and become popular, because Tony Khan is listening to the younger kids, the kids who are the millennials, the Gen Y and the Gen Zs. He's listening to the younger kids and giving them the kind of entertainment that they want, and he's giving you some old techniques. What I like about Tony Khan and AEW is he's not really giving you a completely new thing. He's applying some classic approaches as well, because I like what Tony Khan has done. He's brought back long form storytelling from traditional old school wrestling, but the stars he's using are using new modern wrestling techniques and new modern approaches to building their matches, but the story models are very traditional. So he's showing that you can always take old concepts and still make them resonate. But Vince McMahon is still stuck in like what I call the Attitude Era, which was the second biggest wave of WWE, and he's still trying to get people back to that type of model, but that type of model has become obsolete. And what he fears is that people are going to forget his company. But the irony is that people are forgetting his company because he's holding on to approaches that don't work, pushing stars like what I call Hogan Reigns, who was Roman Reigns, over and over again, like he did Hulk Hogan, trying to make one star dominant and ignoring many of the great talents, and then also releasing a lot of great talents. And that's, again, your baby boomer tunnel vision. They don't want to adapt to the changing world, and they don't want to adapt to the changing customer. And that's the same thing that's been going on in Hollywood right now. You have these people who don't want to adapt to the changing customer and the changing world, and they don't want to sit down and listen to the customer. Part of being in entertainment is you have to really listen to your customers. And when your customers are saying that they want things, you go out here and give those customers exactly what they want. That's one of the things I try to do on the SJS Direct imprint. I remember one time a viewer, after reading Spellbound, told me they wanted to read a story between Spellbound and Spinsterella. And that was one of the reasons why I wrote Legendary Mad Matilda. That was just from having a chat with a viewer on Facebook who picked up Spellbound and Spinsterella, and they said they wanted to know what happened in the middle. So I put fingers to the keyboard in 2017, and I wrote that story because of a conversation with a viewer. So that's the kind of customer service people want from their entertainment industry, and they want to see the entertainers or the publishers or whoever in charge responding to them and their interest. That's one of the other reasons why AEW is so popular, is that Tony Khan listens to the viewers, he listens to the audience, and he gives the audience exactly what they want. And that's what people want to see in entertainment, because as I see it, entertainment these days is very much, you have, if you wait with social media, you have a chance to talk directly to your customers and give them exactly what they like. I mean, this is their money and it is your job to earn it. But many of your boomers in Hollywood, they are detached and they think they are entitled to your money. So they believe they can give you whatever they want, and they don't have to go out here and give you what you want. So that's why we keep seeing the sequels. That's why we keep seeing the remakes. That's why we keep seeing the reboots, because they want to give us their story over again. And they also want to give us the kind of experience they want us to have. But in today's marketplace, you have to give the customer exactly what they'd like. I mean, we live in a different world, but many of your boomer executives, again, they are still stuck in the world of the 80s and the 90s, and they want to continue to give you the same stories over and over again because those stories were safe for them. Those stories made them money. But the great irony was that many of those filmmakers, when they wanted to make those films in the late 60s, 70s, and the 80s, many of those same directors, many of those same screenwriters, many of those same people, they were looking to take somebody to take a risk on them, and they wanted somebody to go out here and give them that chance. And now that they are set in a position, they're not thinking about trying to help the next generation of creators get out here and be able to get their stories to a larger marketplace. Now that they are in their spot, they are very much just like the detached executives who they replaced back in the late 60s and the early 70s. And because they're just like the older executives back then, they all they're thinking about is holding on to and consolidating their power, and they're not really thinking about helping the next generation get their stories out there. And what I noticed with the last 3 or 4 generations is they don't have their own characters. I mean, my generation was like the no, I would say not my generation, Generation Y. They had their own characters. I mean, I remember those kids of the 90s, they had Gargoyles, they had Power Rangers, they had Mortal Kombat. They had many of their own characters. They had much of their own childhood. They had much of their own pop culture, and they had their own characters and experiences like Dragon Ball and things like that. They had their own stuff, and that's something many kids of today are not really allowed to have because we have a group of boomers who just won't let them have their own characters or their own stories or their own pop culture because they fear that if they wind up passing, that their characters will wind up becoming forgotten. And that's again not the case at all when it comes to pop culture. No, great pop culture never gets forgotten. I mean, people still remember The Wizard of Oz from the 30s. They still remember many movies, like I remember Marty and Sunset Boulevard. Truly classic media never really dies, and truly classic media will always have stories and themes that will resonate with each generation. I mean, I have sat there and watched a lot of old 30s, 40s, and 50s media, and I have learned a lot of lessons that resonate to today. I mean, 60, 70-year-old Twilight Zone episodes still resonate with me. 60, 70-year-old Have Gun Will Travel episodes resonate with me. 60-year-old Star Trek episodes still resonate with me. 40-year-old Star Trek The Next Generation episodes still resonate. And again, that is all due to the craft of the writers, and craft is what makes stories absolutely timeless. But the boomer, he fears that he will become forgotten because he fears, or she fears, that her name will no longer be spoken by people in public. But if you've done great content, people will remember you, and they will always be looking for great content. I mean, that's what great content is that the story is so good that it gets passed down from generation to generation. Unfortunately, your boomer fears having their stories passed down because they want to be able to say that they're going to be here forever. But no one is going to be here forever. And you have to trust the next generation with your legacy, because if you don't trust the next generation with your legacy, then they cannot go out here and preserve your legacy. And that's what the boomers are doing in your entertainment industry. They don't trust Gen Xers or Gen Y millennials or Gen Z to go out here and preserve media. No, they are so insecure, they fear that their media will be forgotten. So what they want to do is keep making the same material over and over in the hopes of drilling it in your head that, oh, here are these characters, and I need you to remember these characters. But we would have remembered those characters anyway, and we would have enjoyed them much, much more and valued them if you had kept them in the context of time. If you had kept these characters in the context of time, people would have enjoyed them as they were. Because when you go out here and you make a reboot or a remake, what that does is it lowers the value of the original, because people don't see it as something special. They don't see it as something they should appreciate, and they don't see it as something that matters to them, because it is no longer unique, it is no longer distinct, and it is no longer a part of somebody's generation that is special. No, it is a commercial product that people are just saying that it's always going to be there, and it doesn't really matter to anyone at all, because it doesn't have that emotional or personal value to the audience, because we don't get to see why this was special for one generation. That's all due to people, again, so afraid of their losing their mortality that they don't understand that your mortality is something you are going to lose anyway. Everybody is going to die and pass on, and you have to go out here and understand that that's going to happen. So you can't hold on to the past by trying to by choke the future, because when you choke the future, you can prevent people from having their own pop culture. And when you prevent people from having their own pop culture, then you keep the country from growing as I see it. Because what makes the country grow is that we have generations that pass characters on, pass stories on, and then as they are passing on those stories, they are, one, teaching people to be stewards of these characters and their lore, and then two, as these people learn about what's great about those characters, they then go either add to the lore of the past characters, or they go out here and they create new characters and new stories for the next generation. That's how things go on in a culture. You'll have people who will say, okay, yeah, I love these old characters like Transformers and He-Man from Gen X and G.I. Joe, but I also love the characters that come from another generation, and I love that content. Because, yes, I love my old 80s characters that I grew up with, but I can also appreciate other characters that came out in the 90s, like Batman, the animated series, Gargoyles. I can appreciate Mortal Kombat. I can even appreciate many of these other 2000s characters like Static Shock, and I can even appreciate characters that came later in the 21st century. And I can enjoy all of those stories because I know that these are people passing down their stories from generation to generation. And what resonates is the core of those stories. But what we have today is with the scared boomer is they won't let anybody new come to the marketplace. And because they won't let anybody new come to the marketplace, this is why your entertainment industry is stalling creatively, because they won't let new young talent come in. What happens is we don't get any fresh new ideas. And because we don't get fresh new ideas, many of the kids out here, they don't really get to see their own world, and they don't get to see the world that they are seeing right now. No, we get to see a world from characters from another era tried to be modified for this era, and it doesn't really resonate because it doesn't really come across as genuine, and because kids don't feel it as genuine, they reject these characters because they don't feel like their characters telling their stories or presenting their experience. And that's why many people have an issue with what they call the SJW type characters, because these characters, they just feel so fake, they feel so forced, they're not organic, and they don't really feel like something that came from today. They feel manufactured, they feel like something somebody put together. What's going on, Gabriel and Ray Santana? Glad to see you here. Um, yeah, Gabriel makes a good point. Yeah, the content from the 2000s was very good. I loved a lot of 2000 stuff, and that we did see the quality drop in 2010s because we were seeing a lot of remakes and rehashes. And again, that's all due to that fear of letting new people in. Now, that fear again comes from people fearing that they're going to lose their place in the world, but you're never going to lose your place in the world if you make quality content. I mean, there are YouTubers who came out many years ago, like Real Man Allen 73, Ringo, Dan Freeman, and Rick Scorpio. I still loved their content, and I would still sit down and watch old videos if I could find them. I mean, I have a couple of old Thugtician, old Rick Scorpio, and old Dan Freeman videos in another laptop. And I take a look at them from time to time, like Real Man Allen 73, who I mentioned a while back. I mean, those were classic videos. And again, classic content never goes out of style. I mean, classic content people will enjoy from generation to generation. I mean, I still enjoy those old Bruce Lee Green Hornet episodes. I watch them on YouTube now and again. And that there's a lot of great content out there, and people will appreciate it when they see it. But when you have boomers who keep trying to give us a remake of old content, it just dilutes what was great about the original, and it also prevents another creator from having an opportunity to present the world with a fresh character. I believe that we do need to start really thinking about getting more new independent creators to the marketplace. And that is something the entertainment industry has not been focusing on, getting new independent creators to the marketplace. And what's really sad, is many of these guys who are out here now and are established are not thinking about the future. They're just thinking about maintaining their own spot. And that is a major boomer thing, that they only think about maintaining their own spot. They're just like their grandfathers. They got comfortable. They're in their own spot, but they're not thinking about bringing the next man in and helping that next man get to the next level. I mean, that was something that I always thought was what you're supposed to do. And that was one of the things I liked about AEW is that they're always thinking about getting the next guy over. I mean, I know people don't like Cody, but Cody, I can respect him on one thing. He does try to get the next guy over, even to the point where he sets himself on fire. He will work to get the next guy over because he understands that it's not about what's going on right now. It's about getting that next star over so that you can go out here and still be able to perform and entertain for the next generation of viewers. That was something that I like about Cody and AEW versus WWE, where we're still seeing the same wrestlers over and over again, and there's no real creativity, and the talent is not really being pushed. And instead, Vince releases all the talent, and then AEW shows how talented and great these performers are if given an opportunity to express themselves. Now, another place where we see the boomer fear of mortality, as I see it, is your comic book industry, which has really suffered extensively as a result of boomers not really teaching the craft to the next generation. And that's why the comic book industry has really suffered over the last, I say, 25, 30 years, is because we had a generation of creators who didn't go out here and teach what was great about comics, did not teach the craft of storytelling in a visual medium, did not teach the craft of storytelling as related to script, did not teach the craft of art. And as a result of them not teaching, what happened was the comic book industry creatively has gone into a decline, and people have not picked up comic books like they did in the 80s, where we saw this creative explosion. And one of the reasons why we saw a creative explosion was because the industry was in a slump during the 70s, and they were willing to give young talents like your John Burns, your George Perez's, and many others opportunities. And because they gave those young talents opportunities, what happened was we saw the explosion of the comic book industry, and we started to see comic books become so popular they became mainstream in the 80s. That was all due to people were older, willing to step aside and let young talent come in. And this is what I'm not seeing with the boomers. They came in again in the 70s and the 80s, but they're not reaching back for those kids, and they're not reaching back for that young talent. And when you don't reach back for the young talent, what happens is your industry starts to stagnate, your industry stops growing, and instead of you embracing fresh and new concepts, what happens is your whole business starts to struggle and wither, just like the movie business and the TV business did in the late 60s and early 70s. That's one of the reasons why they wound up stagnating, is because they just did not reach out to all of that young talent, and they didn't give them that opportunity to tell the stories that they related to. They didn't really sit down and go out here and give them those opportunities until till the late 60s, early 70s. And when they did that, we started to see the industry grow again. But what we're seeing now in these 2010s and 2020s is we're seeing the same thing done with these boomers, and they're not really looking to go out here and, like Juwan is saying, bring anything new to the table. They're not looking to give us something unique and original. And what's happening now is many of these guys are really starting to get scared, because people are now moving to other platforms to get their stories out, because your entertainment industry has become such a bloated bureaucracy. You can't even get anybody to read a query letter anymore. And many of the literary agents and many others and the entertainment agents, all they want to do is hear the same stories over and over again. Like Gabriel's pointed out, in the comic book industry, all they want to see is Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns. Meanwhile, manga is making all sorts of different stories and reaching that new audience. And that's why the industry has lost so many, in comic book industry has lost so much ground. And that's why many independent comic creators, they're just saying, we're just going to walk away from the comic book industry. We tried to talk to you, but you just have so much of a big bloated bureaucracy. I can't get to talk to you about a concept. So what I'm going to do is take my concept to crowdfunding, like I'm doing right now, getting ready to do with John Haynes at Death's Door. We're going to take the concept over to crowdfunding, and we're going to go raise the capital outside of the mainstream, because we tried to come and try to sell this concept to you. And since you won't buy it, we're going to take it directly to the customer, like I do with the SJS Direct Imprint. I take these books directly to the customer, because I couldn't get in the door at many of the mainstream publishers, and many of those mainstream publishers, they are just so stuck in one gear, like the boomers, and they're like the grandfathers were in the 60s. And that's why the industry is right now are struggling right now to get audiences, because people had concepts they wanted to share with you, but you didn't want to listen to the customer. You didn't want to give the customer what they wanted. You didn't want to talk about their stories, and you didn't want to bring their experiences to people right now. Like, for example, with the book East End Cancel Vacation, I was talking about cancel culture and making a commentary on cancel culture. And you don't see many TV shows or movies talking about cancel culture. They're not talking about that right now. They're just sitting there and giving you the same old sitcoms from 30 years ago and the same movies from 30 years ago. But people want to talk about different topics from today, and they want to see their commentaries brought to life in stories that resonate to them. That was one of the things that I try to do in many of the SJS Direct books. I try to bring the stories of today to people. And some stories like Little Girl Lost have resonated, and other stories have resonated because I'm talking about what's going on today, and people want to see what's going on today. They want to see the stories that come from their experience and their life, and they're not really getting that from your mainstream media, which is just stuck with a bunch of boomers who are still stuck in the past and still looking to give us what came about when I was a child. But today's children don't relate to that because that's not their life. That's not what they're seeing going on outside their window. And that's not what they're experiencing right now. And people want their own stories, but your boomers don't want to give you your story. They don't want to share other people's experiences. They want to give you their stories from 30 years ago. But those stories from 30, 40, and 50 years ago, those were stories that resonated in that era. And yes, there are some classics that will resonate because the themes are the same. But what we're having is we have a lot of boomers again who fear their mortality. And because they fear their mortality, they are choking the life out of all of the creativity in the entertainment industry. I mean, everything from books to literature to art to music, it just feels so stifled. And when you have a stifled culture like that, you don't really get to see people feeling that freedom to express themselves. And that's why people are walking away from mainstream media to things like crowd-funded projects. And I've seen just so much great creativity over there. When I go out here and I look at the Kickstarters that are out here, the Indiegogos of different comics, I mean, I go over there and I just see the creativity just exploding on those platforms. But your mainstream media will dismiss those platforms and say, oh, that's just some indie stuff. But that indie stuff is way more creative and way more original than most of the stuff I'm seeing from the mainstream. All I'm seeing from the mainstream is a rehash of a rehash of a rehash. Thank you, Soul Survivor, for the super chat. I really appreciate it. He says, Brother Sean, do you think comic book movies would do well if the source material was used and respected? Yes, I definitely do believe comic book movies would do well again if the source material was used and respected. I mean, that's why 2002's Spider-Man was a classic, because it captures the life and soul of everything Stan Lee put in a Spider-Man comic. A Raimi Spider-Man movie is way better than a Disney Spider-Man movie, which feels like it has no heart and no soul. It just is manufactured. But a Raimi Spider-Man movie is just like the comic book come to life. Solar Guild, thank you for the super chat. He says the wanted stories are now considered toxic, so the board panders to the feminists and the snowflakes. Yes, that's what they do now. And pandering just shows how weak these companies are and how they have no confidence in their material. Because if you have confidence in your material, you believe in it and you don't need to pander to different groups. I mean, when I was out here doing the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, yes, I wanted to get people in the goth scene to pick up books in the Spinsterella trilogy, but I wasn't out here begging and pandering to them. I know part of selling is going out here and doing your research. So I went out here and did the research on the goth scene, and I gave credit to all of those goth YouTubers, showing them respect. And some people have come out and bought the books, and one person left a review on, I think it was Spellbound, and they were surprised that I had done that research. And again, you don't have to pander to people to sell. Selling is you believe in your story and you believe in yourself. Thank you, C Truth, the Revelator, for the super chat. He says the mainstream entertainment industry is also in fear of losing its influential grip, but it's already too late. And yeah, I talked about that in a previous live stream. the mainstream media has lost its influence, and it's lost its influence because the boomers pushed all of the people out that could have stayed influential. Most of the influencers are people on platforms like YouTube, people on platforms like Instagram and TikTok. You've pushed all that talent out so that you can try to hold on to your power. But as you've held on to your power, what has happened is that your power base is shrinking because the people who see you as influential are dying and getting older, but the younger people aren't interested because they've already seen this 1,000 times before. So your entertainment industry has lost its grip because they are no longer influential because of their fear of their mortality, and it's their fear of their mortality that caused them to have a dying grasp that has lost all of its grip. So if you guys want to also donate, you can also um, hit the Cash app by clicking the link in the chat. You see. So if you want to donate, you can donate to the Cash app by hitting the link in the chat. That is also how I go out here and stay on the air. And again, I look at the entertainment industry and I see a lot of older people who just they got their break, they got their come up, and instead of reaching back to bring somebody else up, they have, as I've called it, put lighter gasoline on the ladder, and they've burned the ladder. And as they stand there at the top, they are not looking down. They're not looking to help anybody up. They're looking to keep people at the bottom. But the whole thing is, as you're up there, there's no way for you but down. And the way you go down is you're going to land very hard. And the reason why you're going to land very hard is because you could have had help from those people at the bottom to help you as things change. And one of the things that changes in any entertainment industry is there's a end to everybody's career. I mean, in every entertainer's career, there is the trough period where you're starting out. There's the rise period as you're becoming further up. Then there's the peak of your popularity. Then there's the decline. And many of these people in the entertainment industry, they don't want to hit that decline stage. And they don't understand that that decline stage is a part of every entertainer's career. That was something I talk about in my screenplay, All About Marilyn. I talk about the Marilyn's decline stage, but everybody has to get ready for that decline stage because there's going to come a time when people are not going to be as interested in your product as they were because the generation that grew up with it no longer is around or they have moved on. And the next generation, what's going to make them interested is you going out here and crafting great stories. That's something many people don't really understand is that, yeah, people are going to be interested, but they're going to be interested for a different reason. And when you write well-crafted stories and develop well-crafted characters, people are going to be interested, but they're going to be interested because of the quality of the story. And that's that's why you don't have to worry about your mortality as to anything. Because if you do quality work, the quality work will not be forgotten. I mean, quality work will always be remembered. People will always be thinking about a quality story. So you don't have to worry about a quality story getting forgotten. But these people fear that their stories are going to get lost in the shuffle of the internet. But I have discovered so much media. I remember in 2008, 2009, when I first lost my job, I found so much media online and so many movies and TV shows. And when the TV went digital, that's how I learned so much about history and how some of these shows and TV shows and movies were commentaries on the world at the time. That's what happens. People they will sit and look at it from a historical context, and that historical context is people valuing the material. That your material is not going to get forgotten. But those people, they fear their mortality. And I've seen this in all sorts of aspects of the entertainment industry. That was one of the reasons why we got Hal Jordan and Barry Allen back, because a lot of those comic creators, they were afraid that Wally West and Kyle Rayner had become so popular that people were forgetting Barry Allen and Hal Jordan. And what they wanted to do was bring those characters back. And it practically was one of the reasons why DC is struggling right now. They tried to bring back these old characters, not understanding that those characters had run their course organically. So what they wanted to do, because Wally West had become so popular, he had practically surpassed Barry Allen. They decided to bring Barry Allen back. And Kyle Rayner was starting to get so popular, people weren't forgetting who Hal Jordan was. And then when Jon Stewart came along, people really started to forget who Hal Jordan was. So that's why we had people wanting to bring them back to DC Comics. And again, that was all due to the fear of mortality that some creators had as related to their characters. Yeah, that's true, Gabriel. They were the declining sales were due to identity crisis and other things. The books were the whole thing with Al Jordan and Barry Allen. They were brought back partially, I believe, because these creators were scared that these characters were being forgotten. But because Wally had practically had surpassed Barry to a point where people didn't even know who he was anymore. I remember because I was buying Flash at the time in 94, 95, and people had forgotten who he was to a point. And around the 2000s, they had practically forgotten Hal Jordan because Kyle Rayner was doing pretty well, but they brought them back because these creators, they were scared of them forgetting these characters. And that's one of the things that's really, again, part of the whole Hollywood thing is that people are scared of getting forgotten, but you don't get forgotten if you do good stuff. And the whole thing is, if you don't help out those young talents, then you're not. Then they have because a lot of young talents they pay homage to a lot of great creators. They have a lot of great love for great creators. Like when I was doing the Revenge of the Cyber Goddess cover, I was paying homage to Superman versus the Amazing Spider-Man's classic cover, and this is how creators who from another generation show their love for other creators. They pay homage to their work, and that's how they keep the legacy going on. I mean, that's something that many of the boomers aren't really thinking about. A lot of the young creators have a great love for old films, old TV shows, old comic books. I mean, a lot of young creators they grew up with this stuff, and they want to share it with the next generation with their characters, and they want to go out here and pay homage to the work that they do. I mean, this is not the only homage that I did. I did a homage to A Low Down Dirty Shame with the John Haynes Taking Care of Business cover. And again, that was a movie that in my 20s, I grew up with and I loved. And I loved that movie so much that I wanted to pay homage to it with one of my stories. And this one was one where I paid homage to one of my favorite movies, A Low Down Dirty Shame from Keenan Ivory Wayans. So a lot of great creators, they want to go out here and show their respect, and they can't show their respect because the boomers don't respect them to give them that chance, and that's the reason why their material is getting lost. They don't really see that you have to go out here and embrace the young talents, and you have to go out here and help those young talents out because those young talents, they are going to reach back. When you reach back for them, they are going to reach for you. And that's one of the things that a lot of people don't really see, that a lot of people they pay tribute to older talents by little different things. Like with Spellbound, I was paying tribute to Susie Sue and Susie and the Banshees with the title. And with Legendary Mad Matilda, there was the London After Midnight song, Where Good Girls Go to Die. That was the whole inspiration for that story. So creators go out here, we pay homage to all of those great talents who came before us, but if they don't come and reach out to us, we can't really go out here and be able to pay this tribute for those inspirations that we see out here. And that's something people they don't really understand. They don't really understand that a lot of creators, they want to go out here and continue building on legacies, but if they can't get in the door, how can they build anything? That's a critical question that many people in the entertainment industry don't understand. Because they're so scared, oh, he's going to make something bad. He's going to make something stupid. He's going to make something that's going to fail. But the same thing could have been said for all of those creators out there who went out here and made what became future classics like Rocky, Terminator, RoboCop, um, many films that I read about the history of that the studio thought were absolute garbage, like Pretty Woman, a movie that they thought was absolute trash, became a movie that is now considered a classic, and things like House Party, so many great films that were considered that cost nothing for them to make. I mean, like, yeah, like Star Wars, Bloodsport 1, like Star Wars. I mean, this was stuff that they thought where they were going to throw in the trash and be nothing, but these films became classics that were watched from generation to generation. But the sad part is that generation that got all of those chances to make all of those classics for next to no money, they refused to give today's new young talent that opportunity to make the next generation of classics and reach out to the next generation of people and be influential on the culture of today. And because they can't get that influence on the culture has gone underground. And as the culture has gone underground, this is why we're seeing people going and doing things like crowdfunding. This is why we're seeing people going out here and making their own stuff and raising the funds to do their own stuff because they can't really reach those older people who are living in their ivory towers, trying to relive their glory, trying to go back to their prime days, and still trying to give us stories that were of their era, and them trying to make us connect with those characters. Now, there are some people who are exceptions, like I would say the creators of Ghostbusters Afterlife. They get what is important, because when you look at the story of Ghostbusters Afterlife, they really understand the importance of passing down legacy, because that's what that whole film from Jason Reitman is all about. It's really about one generation passing down something to the next generation and making people see why it's important. And that whole understanding of taking the past and giving it to the next generation, that was something that people, they don't really understand is important. And I think that was one of the most beautiful things about Ghostbusters Afterlife, was understanding that, yes, I'm paying homage to the past, but I understand that these kids need to see why this was great to us and why it meant something to us. So after the failure of Ghostbusters 2016, which is another, again, pandering, desperate reboot, we got a beautiful film that paid tribute to what was true to the heart of that comedy. And a lot of people, they don't really get what that film is about, but I got what it was, and I saw it on screen. So I saw what he was trying to do. And again, your Ghostbusters Afterlife just really shows you what happens when you stop being a selfish boomer and you reach back and you go to the next generation and you share with them. You have to reach for those people and connect them to the material. That's something that people at Star Wars weren't able to do. And that's what I'm seeing was happening to the MCU. They're becoming more and more detached from the material. And that's a big problem, because if you don't connect people to the material to make them care about the characters or care about the story, then they have no reason to see what was important about that material and why it mattered to you. You have to show them why this matters to you, why you care about it so much, and why this was a major part of your life. I mean, that's something that many of your boomers are afraid to do because they're so caught up in trying to hold on to what meant something to them. But sometimes the way you make people help people appreciate something is to let that go and let the other person see what was great about the material. That's what you do. You have to let the material go so that the other person can connect to it. And that's something many of your people in the entertainment industry are afraid to do, because they're afraid somebody is either going to mess it up somebody is going to not understand it, but you have to show them and teach them so that they can understand it. Because from what I'm seeing is there are a lot of passionate fans out there that love these characters, love these stories. I mean, and they take those characters and those stories and they hold on to them and they pass them down. I mean, Dragon Ball Z is what, 30 years old, and you've got kids who still love Dragon Ball Z. I mean, Transformers is what, 40 years old. If you great characters, people will connect with those characters, but they can't connect with them until you let them go and let them just be who they're going to be and let them be what they are in the time that they were. I mean, you can't go out here and keep rebooting it and remaking it because it's like a photocopy. It did come out in '84, but it's so classic. I mean, that's Dragon Ball is like 30 years, Gabriel, and it's still so good. And we've got kids who are today still talking about Dragon Ball. And again, quality stuff, it's never going to go out of style. It's just like classic turtleneck sweaters or great slacks. I mean, if you can put together an outfit with classics, you're always going to look good. And a classic is always going to look great. But your whole thing is that your boomers hold on to stuff out of fear. And that fear is something that they don't need to have, because you don't really need to be afraid of letting something go, because it's the next generation's job to inherit these characters. And if you don't let them inherit the characters and let them be able to show you what they can do with those characters, then they're not going to be able to care about them. And then they truly, at that point, will be forgotten. Now, I'm going to get ready to wrap up tonight's stream. And I want to thank everybody for coming out to tonight's stream. So if you guys want to drop a donation to the Cash App or pick up a book like All About Maryland, you can do so by clicking the links in the chat. And I really enjoyed talking about Boomer Hollywood and their fear of mortality, because I really want people to look at the entertainment industry and see that, yeah, we need new stories, we need new concepts, and we need to get new talent out there. And another thing that I want to touch on before I go is the fear of transferring wealth. That's another fear that the boomers have. They fear that if these people start to get rich, they fear that their people they won't be able to stay in power. That's another fear that many have, and that's why they don't want to share power. But as I see it, you're going to pass on, and your legacy will become forgotten. So you may as well share that wealth with somebody else, because you're not going to be around to stay around forever. And that's another fear that many of these creators, not creators, but these entertainers and executives have, is giving that wealth to the next generation of creators to tell the next generation of stories, because they fear that they will become poor, or they fear they will just not be able to generate revenue. But your material is going to not be able to generate revenue, because as material gets older, it does depreciate. And that's something I learned in the entertainment industry, that material from 30 years ago, 40 years ago does not have the same value as it did when it first came out. So you have to understand that it's going to depreciate over time, and once the product hits its peak, it's no longer going to have that same high value that it did, before. So people think that they're going to go out here and make the big money, and it's going to stay forever, but you're going to have to pass that wealth down and deal with the fact that these assets do depreciate over time. And the way you keep those assets from not depreciating is sharing them with the next generation, so that they can see that they're great and get that inspiration to go out here and create other forms of material. So that was the last point I wanted to talk about before I wrap up tonight's stream. And again, asking everybody to donate to the Cash App or to pick up some of the books on the SJS Direct imprint, like Isis, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess, John Haynes, Taking Care of Business, and Easteen, Cancel Vacation. And if you want some great nonfiction, you can pick up Stop Simping in Cyberspace. And you can find all of these books on Amazon.com And I'm still looking for more paperback and ebook sales for the holiday season. And you can get some great positive, action packed fantasy fiction and great nonfiction on Amazon today. So I'm glad you enjoyed the topic, Gabriel. I'm glad everybody did enjoy the topic. This was one that I just really had on my mind for a while. And I did it off the top of my head because I was really thinking about what I wanted to talk about. But this was something that I really wanted to talk about because I really want to see your boomers understand that they need to really start letting some of this young talent come through and start letting this young talent start making stories that resonate to people of today. So I want to thank everybody for coming out to tonight's stream. I'm hoping you enjoyed tonight's stream, and I hope you'll be there for next week's stream.